When your own child calls you a burden, it cuts deeper than any knife. I stood in my kitchen, holding the pie I made for them, reading my son's message telling me I wasn't welcome, and for the first time in 78 years, I finally whispered to myself, no more. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 78 years old. I've lived in this same small house for over 40 years, the walls lined with pictures of people I love more than my own breath. I have spent decades cooking in this warm, yellow kitchen, where the scent of cinnamon and sweet butter feels like a promise of safety. I've watched the seasons change outside these windows while I rocked babies to sleep and bandaged scraped knees. And all this time, I have given and given, believing that's what mothers and grandmothers do, believing love meant saying yes, no matter what it cost me. Until that day. It was the morning of Thanksgiving. The sky was the softest blue, but the wind was sharp as it swept through the empty street outside. I woke up early, humming a hymn under my breath, kneading dough for a pie I planned to take to David's house. My hands, stiff with age, remembered the motion like a prayer. I baked that pie with love, the way I always did, remembering David as a little boy standing on a chair beside me, flour dusting his cheeks, laughter spilling into the air as we made a mess together. I was wrapping the pie in foil, ready to take it over, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Hey, Mom. Beth thinks it's best if you don't come today. Too many people. We'll bring you a plate. Just like that, the room felt cold, even with the oven still warm. I read that message again and again, as if reading it enough times would change the words. I stood there, the pie in my hands, the house so quiet that the ticking clock on the wall sounded like a hammer striking the truth. They didn't want me there. I sank down into the kitchen chair, pressing my hand over my heart as it thudded painfully. I tried to swallow the hurt, to tell myself there was probably a good reason, that maybe they were overwhelmed. But deep down, I knew. I thought of the money I gave them when David lost his job, the nights I drove over to watch Elijah, my grandson, so they could rest or go out to dinner. I thought about how Beth would roll her eyes when I offered advice, calling me old-fashioned when she thought I couldn't hear. And now, I was too much trouble. I stood up, every joint in my body aching, and placed the pie on the counter. The foil crinkled as I pressed it down, sealing in the warmth that no one would share. I went to the window, pulling the curtain back slightly. I watched the neighborhood come alive with families getting into cars, carrying pies, flowers, laughter. Mothers, grandmothers, children. And I was here. Alone. The silence in the house was thick, pressing against my chest, reminding me how often I had been alone in these rooms, how often I had chosen silence to keep the peace, to keep them close, even if it meant losing pieces of myself. I made a cup of tea, letting the steam warm my face, trying to find comfort in the small ritual. But nothing could quiet the words echoing in my mind. Not today, Mom. Too many people. I sat down, the tea trembling in my hands. I looked around my kitchen, the table with the worn edges from years of family dinners, the mismatched chairs, the curtains I sewed myself. I saw the family pictures on the fridge, David holding Elijah as a baby, Beth smiling, all of them gathered in front of this very oven during Christmases past. Tears slipped down my cheeks, unbidden, warm against my cold skin. How did it come to this? I thought. How did I become invisible in the family I built with my own hands? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor, I whispered the word I had never allowed myself to say. No. No to being an afterthought. No to sacrificing myself to keep the peace. No to being silent while they decided when I was allowed to matter. That evening, I took out a small notebook from the drawer, the one I kept near the phone for grocery lists and prayer requests. I wrote down everything I had given them over the years, the loans, the babysitting, the support. I wrote it not out of bitterness, but to remind myself that my love had value, and I was not a burden for having given it. And as I put the pen down, I felt a calm settle over me, like the hush after a storm. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing up for myself, even if it was quietly, in a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and heartbreak. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing. I would not let them take any more of me without respect. I would find my voice. I would find my peace. My name is Evelyn Carter, and the day I finally said, no, was the day I started to truly see the cracks I had ignored for too long. That evening after Thanksgiving, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the pie still untouched on the counter, and I let myself remember. All the small dismissals. The whispered comments. The rolled eyes. The invitations that stopped coming. I had spent years telling myself it was just how family was, that I shouldn't take it personally, that it was better to keep the peace. But peace built on silence is not peace at all. It is just fear wearing a mask. The next morning, I wrapped the pie carefully and walked across the street to see Martha, my neighbor and oldest friend. She's 68, sharp as a tack, with a kindness in her eyes that makes you feel safe enough to share your shame. Martha opened her door, her hair tied up in a bright scarf, and took one look at me before pulling me into a hug. "What happened, Evelyn?" she asked softly as we sat at her small kitchen table, the pie between us. I told her everything. About the message. About the years of doing, giving, sacrificing. About the loneliness that had crept in like a cold draft under the door, chilling me while I tried to pretend it wasn't there. I expected her to tell me to forgive them, to let it go. But instead, she placed her hand on mine, her eyes steady, and said, "Evelyn, you deserve better. You always have." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed, the moonlight streaming through the thin curtains, lighting up the photos of David and Elijah on my dresser. I thought of Elijah, my sweet grandson with his curious eyes and the way he always ran to hug me when he saw me. And I wondered, what lesson would I be teaching him if I kept letting people treat me as if I were nothing? A few days later, I decided to look over my finances. I opened the old tin box I kept on the top shelf of my closet, where I stored my bank statements, receipts, and a notebook where I tracked every loan, every gift, every check I had written for David and Bethany. As I turned the pages, my hands shook. I saw the down payment for their house. The checks for Elijah's school fees. The groceries I paid for when David lost his job. The credit card charges that didn't belong to me but were paid from my account when they'd borrowed my card. I realized I had given them nearly everything I could, and they had taken it with smiles that turned into avoidance when I asked about repayment. I realized they weren't just taking my money. They were taking my dignity. I closed the notebook and held it to my chest, feeling my heart beat steady and slow. A kind of calm washed over me, the kind that comes when you finally see the truth, even if it hurts. The next morning, I called Martha. "Martha," I said, my voice steady, "do you know a good lawyer?" There was a pause on the other end, then her warm, strong voice. "I do, Evelyn. His name is Mr. Henson. He helped my sister when her kids tried to take her house. And he listens." That afternoon, I dressed carefully, choosing my best coat, the dark blue one with the pearl buttons. I brushed my hair back and pinned it neatly. I looked at myself in the mirror before I left. I looked old, yes. My face lined with the years I had spent loving others. But my eyes looked clear for the first time in a long while. Mr. Henson's office was small, with wooden shelves lined with books and a single potted plant in the corner. He was a kind-faced man in his mid-50s, with silver hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose as he listened. I laid out my receipts and the notebook on the table. "I don't want to hurt them," I told him, my voice trembling. "But I can't keep living like this." He nodded gently, folding his hands. "Mrs. Carter, you are not hurting them by asking for what is rightfully yours. You are protecting yourself." We spent hours going over my documents, highlighting payments, loans, and transactions that didn't belong to me. Each paper felt like a small reclaiming of my story, my sacrifices, my worth. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up straight, even as I sat in that small chair, my hands tracing the edges of the documents that told the story of a woman who had given everything for love. When I left Mr. Henson's office, the sky was turning a soft pink, the sun setting over the rooftops as I walked to the bus stop. I felt the weight of fear loosening in my chest, replaced by something unfamiliar but welcome. Strength. That evening, I sat on my porch, a blanket draped around my shoulders, watching the stars appear one by one. I closed my eyes, whispering softly to the night. "I am not invisible. I am not a burden. I am here." For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. I was ready. My name is Evelyn Carter, and after 78 years of giving, I was learning how to protect what little I had left. The morning after I met with Mr. Henson, I woke up before the sun, my small bedroom quiet, the air cool against my skin. I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the firmness of the floor beneath my feet, grounding me. I could feel a shift inside me, like a quiet awakening. The fear was still there, like a shadow in the corner of the room, but it no longer controlled me. I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. The sky was turning from dark blue to the softest gray, birds beginning their songs outside. I thought of Elijah, my grandson, his small hands grabbing mine when he was a baby, his laughter echoing in this very kitchen. I loved him so much it made my chest ache. And I worried, as I sipped my tea, what would happen when he grew up seeing his grandmother treated as an afterthought. Would he learn to treat people the same way? Would he believe that love meant taking without gratitude? I spent the morning sorting through papers, organizing receipts into neat stacks, making notes in the margins. Each slip of paper was a memory, a moment I had chosen to give rather than keep. The $500 I gave when David's car broke down. The $1,000 for Bethany's dental surgery. The grocery bills I paid when they said money was tight. The cash I slipped into David's hand when he said, "Just for a little while, Mom." I paused, holding one receipt from 3 years ago, a payment for Elijah's school trip. I could still see his face, bright and excited, when he came running up to me, waving the permission slip. "Grandma, I get to go to the zoo," he shouted, his smile so big it made me laugh. I remembered the warmth in my chest as I signed the check. And yet, when I needed them, they were not there. A text message, a cold dismissal, after all I had given. The thought stung, but I let it wash over me without looking away this time. Around midday, Martha came over with 2 cups of coffee, her scarf tied brightly, her eyes full of that unshakable kindness that had carried me through so many storms. She sat beside me at the kitchen table, glancing over the papers. "You're brave, Evelyn," she said quietly. I shook my head, tears threatening. "I'm just tired, Martha. Tired of being the one who's always saying yes." She reached over, taking my hand in hers. Her grip was strong, steady. "And now you're saying no. That's the bravest thing of all." Later that afternoon, David called. I stared at the screen as his name flashed, my heart thudding in my chest. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice casual, as if nothing had happened. Beth and I are going to bring Elijah over tomorrow. Maybe you can watch him while we run errands." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "David," I said, my voice trembling but clear, "we need to talk." There was a pause on the other end. "About what?" he asked, his voice uncertain now. "About everything." He sighed. "Mom, if this is about Thanksgiving." "It's about a lot more than Thanksgiving," I interrupted gently. "It's about years of taking without giving back. It's about how I've let myself become invisible in this family." Another silence. I could almost hear him trying to find the right words. "Mom, we're just busy, you know how it is," he said, but there was a defensiveness in his voice, a crack in the calm. I looked around my kitchen, the sunlight streaming in, illuminating the papers spread out, the notebook open to the page where I had written in bold letters, "I deserve respect. David, I love you. I love Elijah. But I can't keep doing this. We need to sit down and talk about what I've given, what I've sacrificed, and how I've been treated." There was a long pause. "Mom," he said finally, softer this time, "can we talk tomorrow?" I swallowed the fear that rose in my throat. "Yes, David. Tomorrow." After I hung up, I stood by the window, watching the wind move the branches outside, the leaves rustling softly. I felt scared, yes. But underneath the fear was a quiet pride, like a small flame that refused to go out. That evening, I took out the pie from the fridge. It was still wrapped, untouched. I unwrapped it, cut a small slice, and placed it on my best plate. I sat at the table, took a bite, and let the taste of cinnamon and apples fill my mouth. Tears slid down my cheeks, but they were not just tears of sadness. They were tears of release. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was choosing myself. Choosing to be seen. Choosing to be heard. My name is Evelyn Carter, and the day I sat across from my son and his wife to confront them was the day I stopped being invisible. David and Bethany arrived the next morning, later than they said they would, with Elijah holding Bethany's hand as they came up the walkway. I stood at the window, watching them, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I saw Elijah glance up at me, his small face lighting up as he waved. I forced a small smile and waved back, holding on to the reminder of why I was doing this. When they stepped inside, the air changed. Bethany's perfume, sharp and floral, filled the room as she glanced around, her eyes flicking to the papers neatly stacked on the table. David rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes, while Elijah ran up to me, wrapping his little arms around my waist. "Grandma," he shouted, his joy cutting through the tension like sunlight through clouds. I knelt, hugging him tightly, breathing in the scent of shampoo and warm skin. "Hi, my love," I whispered, pressing a kiss to his hair. "Why don't you go play with the blocks in the living room while I talk to your mommy and daddy?" When Elijah left the room, the silence returned, heavy and thick. I stood, gesturing toward the table. "Please, sit down." They exchanged a glance, Bethany rolling her eyes slightly before sitting, her arms crossing defensively. David lowered himself into the chair, his shoulders hunched. I remained standing for a moment, gathering my courage, before I sat down across from them. The table between us was covered with papers, the notebook with the list of loans and expenses, and a folder Mr. Henson had prepared for me, outlining what I had given over the years. David's eyes flickered as he scanned the papers, while Bethany's jaw tightened. "Mom," David started, his voice careful, "what is all this?" I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the boy I raised, the man he became, and the choices he had made. "It's the truth, David," I said softly but firmly. "It's everything I've done for you. For this family. And how I have been treated in return." Bethany let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Oh, come on, Evelyn. You're really keeping score now? I turned my gaze to her, meeting her eyes without flinching. No, Bethany. I was never keeping score. But I was keeping track, because one day, I knew I would need to remember that I am not worthless. She looked away, her lips pressed tightly together. David rubbed his face, letting out a breath. Mom, we're sorry about Thanksgiving, okay? Beth just wanted to keep things simple, that's all. I felt the sting in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. It wasn't just Thanksgiving, David. It's been years of me being the last thought, the afterthought, the one who's good enough to help when you need it but not good enough to be included. I picked up the folder, opening it so they could see the highlighted numbers. This is what I have given to you. Out of love, yes, but love does not mean I deserve to be treated as if I do not matter. David stared at the papers, his face pale. Mom, we were going to pay you back, you know that. Were you? I asked quietly. Or did you hope I would forget? Because I did, for a long time, hoping it would bring us closer. But it didn't. Bethany opened her mouth, but I raised my hand gently. I'm not here to fight with you. I'm here to tell you that I will not give any more of myself without respect. I am not asking for everything back, but I am asking for accountability. And for boundaries. David looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. Mom, I didn't realize how much you were hurting. I know you didn't, I said, my voice softening. But it's time you see it now. Bethany looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting. What do you want us to do? She asked quietly, the defensiveness gone from her voice, replaced by something closer to fear or guilt. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I want you to respect me. To repay what you can, over time, if you are able. And to understand that I will no longer be treated as invisible in this family. The room was silent, except for the faint sound of Elijah humming to himself in the living room, building towers out of blocks. Finally, David nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks. Okay, Mom. We can do that. We will do that. Bethany looked at me, her eyes glassy, and nodded once, unable to speak. I stood up, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders, and went to the living room where Elijah sat, his block tower standing tall. Grandma, look, he shouted, beaming with pride. I knelt beside him, smiling, tears in my eyes. It's beautiful, baby. Just beautiful. And as I hugged him, I felt something deep within me settle. For the first time in my 78 years, I was no longer afraid to take up space in my own family, to say that my love was worth something, and that I deserved to be seen. That day, I finally learned. Saying no was not an end. It was a beginning. My name is Evelyn Carter, and after 78 years, I was learning how to live with the word no, and the quiet freedom it brought. The days after that conversation were quiet, but a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of being ignored, but the stillness that comes when a storm has passed, and you are left standing, a little shaken, but whole. David called me a few days later. Mom, he said, his voice low, I've been looking over the numbers. We can't repay everything now, but we can start with small payments each month. I took a breath, feeling tears sting my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you, David. That's all I ask. Bethany didn't call, but she sent a message. Evelyn, I'm sorry for how I've treated you. I didn't realize how much you were carrying. It was short, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. I sat at my kitchen table after reading her message, looking around at the small space I had called home for 40 years. The table was scratched from years of elbows leaning on it, from grandchildren coloring on it, from me writing letters late at night. I reached out and smoothed my hand over the wood, whispering softly to the room. I am here. I am enough. That afternoon, Martha came by with her bright scarf and a tin of lemon cookies. Well? She asked, settling into the chair across from me, her eyes sharp but kind. It went better than I expected, I admitted, pouring us tea. She took a cookie, nodding. Of course it did. You finally let them see you. We sat in the soft afternoon light, the breeze rustling the curtains, sipping tea and letting the silence fill the spaces where fear used to live. A few days later, David brought Elijah over, asking if I could watch him for a few hours. I hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded. But before he left, I looked David in the eyes. David, I'm happy to help. But I need you to know it's not something I will always be able to do. I have my own life too. David blinked, then smiled softly. I know, Mom. Thank you. Elijah and I spent the afternoon in the garden, his small hands digging in the dirt as we planted marigolds, the same flowers I planted with David when he was a boy. Grandma, look! Elijah shouted, holding up a worm he found, giggling with delight. I laughed, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, the earth beneath my knees, and the joy in my heart. For the first time in a long time, I was helping because I wanted to, not because I felt I had to. That evening, after David picked up Elijah, I made myself a simple dinner: tea, toast with butter, and a small bowl of soup. I sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I watched the world slow down, the birds settling in the trees, the breeze carrying the scent of the marigolds we planted. Inside, my phone buzzed. A message from David. Mom, thank you for today. Elijah loves you so much. I smiled, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but they were warm, peaceful tears. I typed back. I love him too. Thank you for letting me be part of his life. That night, I lay in bed, the moonlight streaming through the curtains, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. Not because the past was erased. It wasn't. But because, for the first time, I was living on my own terms. I was learning that saying no didn't mean I loved them less. It meant I was loving myself, too. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I spent so many years waiting for others to see me that I forgot how to see myself. Until I finally said no. A week after my talk with David and Bethany, I woke up early, the light just beginning to spill through the curtains, soft and golden. I lay there, listening to the quiet, letting it comfort me instead of haunt me. For the first time, the quiet felt like mine. I made myself a cup of tea and stepped onto the porch, the air crisp, the world smelling of dew and earth. Birds were already busy in the trees, their songs a reminder that life goes on, no matter what storms come. I sipped my tea and closed my eyes, breathing in the moment. Later that day, I opened the old cedar chest in the corner of my room. It creaked as I lifted the lid, the scent of lavender sachets rising, mixed with the soft smell of old fabric. Inside were pieces of me I had put away for years. My watercolor paints, the soft brushes wrapped in cloth. The small, leather-bound journal I once used to write poems on Sunday afternoons. The old gardening gloves I wore when David was a boy, teaching him to pull weeds and plant tomatoes. I took out the paints, setting them on the kitchen table, and stared at the blank paper for a long time, fear whispering that I was too old, that it was too late. But then I dipped the brush into the water, letting the colors bloom, and I began to paint. The colors flowed, soft blues and greens mixing into each other, forming the shape of the marigolds Elijah and I had planted, the soft curve of the porch railing, the warmth of the morning sun. As I painted, I felt a joy I had long forgotten, a quiet, humming contentment that made the hours slip by unnoticed. A few days later, Martha stopped by, her eyes lighting up when she saw the painting on the table. "Evelyn, did you paint this?" she exclaimed, picking it up carefully. I nodded, smiling shyly. "It's been a long time." She looked at me, her eyes warm. "It's beautiful. Just like you." That afternoon, we sat on the porch, sipping tea as the wind rustled the marigolds. Martha talked about her plans to start a small reading group at the community center, and for the first time, I felt the spark of wanting to join. "I think I'd like to come," I told her quietly. Her face broke into a smile. "You should, Evelyn. It's time you did something for yourself." In the evenings, I began taking walks around the block, the air cool against my face, the sky darkening into deep blues and purples. Neighbors would wave, and I would wave back, no longer afraid to take up space, no longer afraid to be seen. David and Bethany called once a week, checking in, their voices softer, more careful, but also more genuine. One evening, David called and asked, "Mom, how are you, really?" I paused, the question catching me off guard, and then I smiled. "I'm good, David. I'm really good." And for the first time, I meant it. On Sundays, Elijah would come over, and we would paint together, his small hands smudging colors onto the paper as he giggled. "Grandma, look! I made a rainbow," he would shout. And I would laugh, feeling warmth bloom in my chest. I was no longer giving from emptiness. I was giving from a place of fullness, of choice, of love that did not cost me my peace. One morning, as I sat on the porch watching the sunrise, I whispered to myself, "You are not too old. It is not too late." I realized that saying no was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of living the rest of my life on my own terms. I was reclaiming pieces of myself I had given away without even realizing it, pulling them back gently, like threads, weaving them into something new. Something beautiful. And as the marigolds swayed in the morning breeze, I smiled, breathing in the quiet, knowing that this piece, this small, quiet life, was mine. Because I chose it. My name is Evelyn Carter, and after years of silence, I found my voice, and with it, the courage to share my story. One crisp morning, Martha called me with an invitation. "The community center is starting a women's group," she said, her voice warm with excitement. "They want someone with your wisdom to come and talk." I hesitated. Standing in front of strangers? Sharing my pain? But Martha's gentle encouragement was hard to resist. "Evelyn, your story could help others. You're stronger than you think." So, I agreed. On the day of the meeting, I dressed carefully, my favorite blue sweater, the one that made me feel calm. I carried my little journal, the one where I wrote poems and thoughts, now filled with reflections and hopes. As I walked into the bright room filled with women of all ages, their faces curious and kind, I felt a flutter of nerves. But when I began to speak, about love, loss, betrayal, and finding strength, my voice grew steady. I told them about saying no after years of giving, about reclaiming myself. One woman, younger than me, wiped tears from her eyes. "Thank you, Evelyn," she whispered. I thought I was alone. Others nodded, sharing their own stories, and a sense of connection blossomed in the room. Afterward, Martha and I sat together, sipping tea and smiling. "You did beautifully," she said. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Back at home, things were changing, too. David and Bethany came by unexpectedly one afternoon. They sat with me in the living room, their expressions softer than before. Bethany took my hand gently. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about how I treated you. I want to do better. Not just for you, but for Elijah. I want him to learn respect and kindness." David nodded in agreement. "We're sorry, Mom." "Really?" I felt a swell of emotion, a mix of relief, sadness, and hope. "I forgive you," I said, "but it's not just about forgiveness. It's about respect, boundaries, and love that doesn't take but gives." They listened. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like family again. Elijah came running in, his laughter filling the room. "Grandma, look what I drew." His bright eyes sparkled as he held up a colorful picture of our garden, the marigolds blooming under a shining sun. I hugged him tight, feeling the warmth of family weaving itself back together. That night, as I sat on my porch wrapped in a shawl, I reflected on how far I'd come. From silence to speaking out. From invisibility to being seen. From giving without limits to loving with boundaries. I whispered to the stars above. I am not just a grandmother. I am a woman who chose herself. Who found her strength in the storm. Who is finally free. And in that freedom, I found peace. My name is Evelyn Carter, and this is the story of how I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace. After years of silence, years of giving without being seen, I finally stood up and said, "No," and that one word changed everything. The days that followed were not easy. Change never is. But I held my ground, gently but firmly. I set boundaries with David and Bethany. I made it clear that respect wasn't optional. When they stumbled, I reminded them calmly, without anger or shame, that I deserved kindness and honesty. I reconnected with old friends and found new ones. The women's group at the community center became a place where my voice mattered. Where stories like mine were heard and valued. Each day, I painted a little, wrote in my journal, and nurtured the marigolds in my garden, the simple joys I had long forgotten. With every brushstroke and every bloom, I reminded myself that life could be beautiful, even after pain. One afternoon, Elijah came to me with a drawing. "Grandma, this is you," he said proudly. "Strong and brave." I smiled, tears glistening in my eyes. "Yes, my love," I told him. "Strong and brave." I looked around my home, the walls filled with memories, the garden alive with color, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I realized that saying no wasn't selfish. It was an act of love. Love for myself. Love for my family, to teach them how to love me, too. If you are listening to this, remember. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be loved, not for what you give, but for who you are. And sometimes, saying no is the bravest thing you can do. Because it is the first step to saying yes to yourself. I am Evelyn Carter. I am a grandmother. I am a woman who chose herself. And my story is proof that it's never too late to stand up, speak out, and find your strength.